Jason Crow from Colorado's 6th Congressional District, and I want to extend a thank you to Representatives DeGette, Perlmutter, and Neguse, who also joined me on our second weekly oversight visit of the GEO ICE Detention Center. Today's visit was part of a larger effort to bring oversight and accountability to this facility, but also the system nationwide. As many of you know, we decided to launch these weekly visits after we heard from ICE that they had no medical authority at this facility and other for-profit detention centers. This is exactly why I've called for the end of ICE's contracts with these private for-profit detention centers. They have created an immigration detention system that is driven by corporate profit and encourages corporations like GEO to cut corners on necessary medical care and safety to increase their bottom line. The truth is, we don't expect this administration to act and hold ICE accountable. This is a boots-on-the-ground effort to fill in those gaps of oversight and ensure we are doing everything we can to increase oversight and improve conditions at these facilities. While this detention center was originally used to house detainees who are facing criminal charges, today about 800 of the 1,300 here are being held here after seeking asylum or on immigration charges, with many of them transported to Aurora from the border. What we saw today was repeated concerns from a number of the detainees about health care. We visited the women's facility. Many of them expressed to us that it's taking them anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks just to get basic health care, to get aspirin, to address very basic issues. Many of them have been here for 4, 5, 6 months. This is a facility that is not designed for long-term housing, yet we're seeing them house many of these detainees for very long periods of time without the adequate care. What we were also told today is that many of the senior positions within the health unit, including the top 2 positions, are currently vacant, as well as psychologists. And these vacancies, we believe, are causing some of these delays and inadequate medical attention. Again, we do these visits because we know that oversight works. In February, our visit led to the disclosure of a mumps outbreak. It launched immunization efforts and helped to ensure detainees have their right to counsel when under quarantine. We have all heard and seen what is happening in other facilities around the country and at the border and at facilities. It is absolutely horrific, and it's really contradictory to our national values. Human beings are suffering in our custody. All of this is about upholding our values and ensuring the basic dignity and decency of all people. It is our hope that this becomes a national model for other districts and facilities. Ensuring safe and sanitary conditions isn't just a public health issue, it is a moral imperative. Now it's my honor to introduce you my friend, the Congresswoman from Denver, Diana DeGette.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. And I really want to thank Congressman Crow for convening us here, and I want to thank him for his diligent effort to hold this GEO facility accountable. I want to echo something he said. Oversight matters. It matters when Congressman Crow, when we come out here, when the staff comes out here, because it makes people change their behavior. But what cannot change is this. This is a private holding facility. It's not intended to hold people for long periods of time. One of the units that we visited was the women's unit, which has 48 women in one dormitory unit. 48 women, and one lady we talked to has been there for a year and a half. Most of the rest of them have been for just a few months, but even for a few months, that is not the kind of treatment that we should be giving people in the United States of America. Just to echo about the medical care, some of those women, I can say this because I'm the female member of the delegation, some of those women asked for aspirin for headaches or for menstrual cramps, and they didn't get any kind of medical response for a week. Well, that's not going to solve that problem. And so this is why oversight matters. Is this facility has got to get robust and immediate medical care for these individuals, and they need to have the statistics to prove that they're doing it. And bottom line, as Jason said, we need to close this facility. We should not be having private detention facilities in the United States of America. Now Ed Perlmutter, our neighbor to the west.
Just a couple thoughts. For me, I used to represent this area until redistricting, and the facility at that point housed about 500, 600 people, most of whom had some kind of criminal violation. So that was the bigger percentage. Asylum seekers, much smaller percentage. That has completely flipped, and now we're at about 1,237. I think as of today, 1,300 people within this facility. So that's quite a change, and most of that's happened within the last year to year and a half. So I think that's just something we all need to absorb. The other thing that I was surprised by was within this facility there are 60 different countries. People from 60 different countries are detained in this facility, and I talked to 2 young women, one from Vietnam, one from China, who had been smuggled in from their respective countries up through Mexico. And it was very difficult to communicate with them, but at least there was a little conversation. And the smuggling component, not just from South and Central America and Mexico, now extends worldwide. And it's just something that I think we as members of Congress certainly have to address. I'd say the last thing, GEO and ICE really had to be pushed by Congressman Crow to open the facilities in this fashion. But I do want to thank them for allowing us to go in and to particularly visit with the women who were in this major dormitory setting. And so if you don't ask, if you don't push sometimes, we're not able to respond as representatives. And I really want to thank Jason for taking this on. And again, I want to I will thank the GEO people for letting us in there and really giving us a pretty wide open tour of the facility. Oh, Joe Nagoose.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
I think he's from Boulder.
I first want to just say thank you to Congressman Crow, as the dean of our delegation did, for convening us and for his efforts here in terms of ensuring oversight of the facility. There's no doubt that our immigration system is broken. That is very clear to each and every one of us. And in my view, I think it is a byproduct of this administration's disastrous policies up and down the board, including the zero tolerance policy that's been applied on our southern border. And we see the byproduct of that now here today. But I will also say, I think part of what gets lost in some of this debate is that there are very real people who are going through some pretty trying circumstances. Ed, I think, talked about this in a way that resonates with me. You think about the people who are in this facility who have fled violence from halfway across the world, in many cases leaving their families, leaving everything they've ever known to come to the United States to seek refuge. And as many folks here know, my parents happen to be immigrants who came here to the United States as refugees. It is critical that we all collectively as a society, and I think as a government, demand that these individuals be treated in a humane way. And that includes not just folks on our southern border, but here in the interior of the country at facilities like this one. I think it's critically important that we do oversight here, which is why I'm glad to have been a part of the delegation's visit today. But the oversight's going to continue in Washington as well. Congressman Crow has been a passionate advocate for that. Congresswoman DeGette on the Energy and Commerce Committee as chair of the Oversight Committee has been pushing to hold this administration accountable for its family separation policy. We've sent in a letter, I serve on the Judiciary Committee and the Immigration Subcommittee, demanding that a hearing be held on these private detention facilities. So, because, like Congressman Crow, I agree that we should not have for-profit detention, period, and that we should remove the profit motive out of immigrant detention. So I will just say that the oversight's going to continue, and it's important that it continue both here and in Washington, D.C., and I appreciate Congressman Crow and his staff for doing that. And with that, I'll turn it back to Congressman Crow.
Thank you. I think we have some time for a few questions. Yeah, the numbers that I was given was they currently have one psychologist vacancy that they're trying to hire, and in their top 2 positions, both the health services administrator for the facility and the deputy administrator are vacant.
Did they say how many psychologists they have?
They currently have 1 psychologist and 1 clinical social worker, were the numbers that I was given.
Do you know if those people are based here, or
We were told those are resident practitioners.
Do you have any thoughts on the Vice President not visiting this facility on his trip to Colorado?
Well, it's my understanding that the Vice President, was going to visit this facility, decided instead to do a fundraiser in Aspen. We would reiterate our open invitation to anyone who wants to come and join us in our transparency and oversight, whether that be the President, the Vice President, any member of the House or the Senate. We think government works best when it's open and transparent, and we would welcome anyone to join us in this effort.
Congressman, I know you know I interviewed the acting director of ICE today, and he turned this back on Congress, saying you guys are responsible for giving them the resources to carry this out. Congress is the one that has spoken very explicitly about getting ICE out of the detention business because ICE is trained in law enforcement. They're not trained in the detention services. He said they requested 52,000 detention beds last year. Congress gave them 45,000. This year, the bill that came out of the House had 34,000 beds. So, if you're not going to properly fund them, he says, how do you expect them to carry out their job?
But Sean, as we know, there are challenges on every level, right? The policies of this administration, from zero tolerance to forcible separation, the aggressive enforcement at the border, as Ed Perlmutter mentioned, the fact that they're now moving border detainees up to this facility is reverberating issues throughout the entire system. But the larger point, as Joe Neguse mentioned, is we do have a broken immigration system, and we are sitting here ready to work with the administration and with the Senate to fix the system, right? We have to fix the system. We have to make sure we're driving resources where they are. We also have to make sure that we're doing things locally as well. And I would invite comments.
I would add to say that many of the people who are being detained in facilities such as this do not have serious criminal offenses. And if they were processed more expeditiously through the system, then they could be released on bond, and then they wouldn't be sitting here in this system. So one of the things Congressman Neguse and I were talking about, because he's on the Judiciary Committee, we need to get more resources, and frankly, the Trump administration needs to commit more money for resources for judicial disposition of these cases. And if people are waiting for a decision on their applications, then release them on bond. But that, just saying Congress isn't giving them more beds. I think it's true that many of the people in here are not here on serious criminal offenses. Probably most of the people.
So the people that they did do that for recently, only 3% of them turned out for their court hearings, and that's why they did the enforcement action. He says recently is to go out because there's a warrant for
The
their
people
arrest
they're
because
doing,
they didn't turn
Sean,
up
the
for
people they're doing the enforcement actions on are not people who simply have come in and made an application for asylum. They're criminals.
Just get a little closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry.
So the other thing is, we did address kind of what we did address in this last bill that we passed about 2 weeks ago, a backlog in the courts where we'd had room for 90 immigration judges. They hadn't been filled, but we added another 150 slots, primarily at the border. In this facility, there are 3 immigration courts. And I was just visiting with some lawyers who were going in to represent some of the people and what kind of backlog, at least in the courtrooms here, existed. And they said they can get in within a week or 2. But even so, I still was dealing with 2 young women, one of whom had been here 3 months and the other one 4 months. So at the border, we've got a tremendous backlog, and we need immigration judges. And to your question, we did add the resources to now have 250 more or 240 more immigration judges. As to the beds, you sort of asked 2 questions at once. One was whether or not we should have the private sector running our detention facilities and our jails, and the other is, do we have enough beds? Well, we'd say that the president has said we're not accepting anybody, period. And then we've seen this, mushrooming of the population in the last year and a half. This didn't really exist under Barack Obama or George Bush or Bill Clinton, when we actually had higher immigration numbers. We didn't have this kind of pressure on our system. So there are a lot of things going on here besides just the resources, but I wanted to tell you, in this bill recently, we did add beds and we did add more judges.
What was your impression of the facility? Congressman Perlmutter, what was your impression of it? He said he went through it, the director did, and he found it to be sanitary, humane, recreational.
Look, everything's in comparison to something else. And compared to the border, it's a much better situation, okay? In terms of having 48 women housed in a kind of half-sized gymnasium where they eat and they sleep and they use the facilities, I don't think that's good policy, and I don't think that's what we want in America.
Well, I want to provide
let's get
questions
some
from
more
other
questions.
folks too.
All right, I got to go. Anyway.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Ed.
That your three colleagues said that we should not do, I should not do contracts with private prison companies anymore. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, I've never supported the private sector handling. So from the time I was in the state Senate, where I objected to private contractors owning our prison facilities, I still don't think it's a good idea, because there's a potential profit motive behind all of this, and that doesn't make sense to me. But in terms of their willingness, after Jason pushed them to let us come in and tour the facility, I want to just end with a thank you for that. But I think the president's immigration policies, whether it's white, black, brown, because we've got 60 countries, Poland in there, Russia in there, his policies are not what I believe makes up America.
Next question?
Thank you.
With respect to that public-private partnership, I mean, what's the solution beyond private?
Well, you know, the fact is, with GEO Group, you're dealing with a company that last year made $2.5 billion of profit. And they're running this facility right here. And I just talked to some of those 48 women, one of whom asked for an aspirin a week ago for severe cramping and never received it. Right? So there's a severe disconnect here. And there's an accountability problem, there's an oversight problem. But whenever you have a profit motive in a detention system, you're going to have the bottom line dictating things like health, welfare, safety, and wellness of the folks. It's inevitable. And that's why you heard us say that that's not the type of system you should have. You know, it needs to change.
And the solution is to make a national decision about what we want to do about detention of refugees, and then to devote the appropriate public resources to it, but not try to do it on the cheap, because it really does make a human impact.
Next question?
Joe, do you want? Yeah, we continue to work hard. The question was about the POD Act, the Public Oversight of Detention Center Act that I introduced after repeatedly being denied access to this facility, and really was just kind of beside myself about the fact that I couldn't get into a detention center just a few miles from my home in a congressional district that I represent. So we continue to work really hard to get co-sponsors and work to get bipartisan support. And what we're doing is talking to folks, across the aisle, saying that this is not political. This is about good government. Right? If you think government works best with transparency and accountability and oversight, then join us in that effort. So we continue to push very hard to make that happen. And I will say that we were successful actually in getting it put into the appropriations bill. So right now the current DHS appropriations bill does have the POD Act in it, which would give immediate relief and immediately provide us access nationwide to border protection, HHS, and ICE facilities throughout the country, and I think make a very big difference.
We have time for 2 more questions.
The ICE director in an interview today had said that this facility is well run and humane, clean, and it's better to be run by private companies because they're more professional and they know how to deal with detainees. What would your response to that?
I think you heard our response about the private detention centers, right? Whenever there's a profit motivation in a facility that does what this facility does, I think you're going to have some issues like we saw firsthand, right? And you can have people say what they want to say, but this is why we are here doing this, because we are going to see it with our own eyes. We're going to have our own discussions. We're going to discharge our responsibility as members of Congress to conduct oversight, and we're going to make our own decision. And based on what we've seen over and over again, not just at this facility, but at facilities across the country, there are massive changes that need to be made, and we're going to continue to fight to make those changes.
Let me just add that this facility is clean, okay? But there's other issues like access to medical care, and this is not the GEO's fault, but ability to get lawyers and to get processed through the judicial system, like having 48 women in one dormitory room in bunk beds with some sort of jury-rigged showers in the back. The issues go much deeper than is it clean, and they go to the more fundamental question of how do we want to act as a country towards people who are coming to our border, presenting themselves for asylum, and then being shipped to places like this all around the country. That's really the fundamental question that we need to answer as a country.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with my colleagues. I guess I would just, not to belabor the point, but go back to the point I made earlier about the system being very broken, and not every one case is the same, but again, if you put yourselves in the shoes of someone whom is fleeing real political, religious violence from another country and comes across and claims asylum on our southern border, and if they are deported or repatriated back to their home country, is in significant risk of being in danger in terms of their life, they are then sent to this facility, let's say as an example, and are in detention for months on end before they are able to ultimately go through the asylum process and potentially be either paroled or out on bond while that claim is pending. But let's assume that the claim is ultimately granted. The point being that long, convoluted process, I think we have to have a national conversation, and the Congress has to have a conversation about whether that system comports with our sense of humanity and decency and our status in this country as a place that welcomes immigrants. And I think that it does not. And so that's a conversation that I think we're going to continue to have in the Congress.
I want to clarify something. I'm not sure everybody understands this. The majority of the people who are being held at this center are not being held here for criminal offenses. And I think all of us, plus Congressman Perlmutter, would agree. If you have somebody who is a detainee here and they're being held not just on their immigration status but for a criminal offense, that's a whole different situation. Their criminal cases need to be expedited. But if you have people who are just being held here because they have come across the border, that's a different situation in my view, and it goes to exactly what we're all saying up here.
Last question. Do you guys think things would have looked different had you come in unannounced?
Well, I tried to back in February. I mean, this whole effort started with an unannounced visit in February of this year, because shortly after I joined this new Congress, my office started to receive numerous reports of substandard conditions, medical issues, lack of access to counsel, and people told us that when they did announce visits that they would put out the window dressing and it would look very different. So that's why we made the decision to first conduct an unannounced inspection, and of course we were denied the ability to do that, not just once but 3 times until we finally gained access. So that's why I've introduced the POD Act, and that's why we're pushing hard for the appropriations component of the POD Act, because we believe very strongly in regular oversight and making sure that we're conducting that on a regular basis, that we're not just getting a window dressing account of what's happening, but we get a snapshot over time of what these facilities are really like. And I will say, before we wrap up, to the woman's question over here, just on the issue of this facility versus the border. I mean, this facility does not house children. This facility does not house adults who have been separated from their children, which there are problems, very deep-rooted problems with not only that policy, but with the facilities on the border and across the country that are addressing facilities with children and with parents that have been separated. So we have to make sure we're addressing those as well as the issues in our own backyard. And it's not an either-or choice, right? It's not about deciding whether or not we're going to address facilities with children, facilities on the border, or facilities in Aurora, Colorado. We can and we must and we will do all of it.
By the way, I'm going down to Texas next week to look at some of the facilities with children because my committee has jurisdiction over those facilities with Office of Refugee Resettlement. So stay tuned. We'll have an update.
Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate you coming on this important issue.